Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. So I just saw How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Hidden World. Let's talk about it. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World is directed by Dean DeBelois, I believe is how you pronounce his name, and he also directed Lilo and Stitch for Disney, and I'm a huge fan of the Disney animated films. It's not quite one of my favorites in the top 10-ish, but I do love the character of Stitch, and so when I found out that he was actually the same director, it made sense because my love of Toothless is just about on par. I also really enjoyed the How to Train Your Dragon series in general. I think it's one of the very few animated franchises that have been quite consistent in terms of their quality and just the storytelling and the imagination that goes into these films is really quite spectacular. So I was really looking forward to seeing this third film. I wasn't terribly excited because even though I really liked the second one, I haven't really found myself going back to it as often as I went back to the first, but I thought it was an interesting idea of just kind of finishing off the trilogy and seeing where these characters have moved on. So with that said, I'm going to talk about the good, I'm going to talk about the bad, what my thoughts were on this film, and you guys can let me know what you thought of it if you've already seen it down in the comments below. And if you haven't seen it yet, are you looking forward to seeing it? Please be sure to let me know as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the good stuff. Firstly, I think the true testament to the excellent creative writing on this franchise has to go to the friendship of Hiccup and Toothless. It's incredible how over the years, about 10 years ago, we were introduced to this pair and we still remain not only interested but actively invested in their friendship. This film very much leans into that dynamic, and when it does so, I think that's when it reaches its heights, is when it focuses on their friendship and the fact that as these films have gone on, they've grown just as they've grown with the audience. They've grown physically and they've also grown in the maturity of what their friendship is. Toothless is definitely one of my favorite animated characters ever. The puppy-like qualities that they've given him is so adorable, and they make him so endearing to the audience. Hiccup is also an excellent protagonist. He has his flaws and insecurities, but it makes for a very well-rounded character, and the fact that we have that history with him and we've seen him basically grow up alongside us, I think that's what really enhances his character. And in this film in particular, he's facing some pretty adult decisions, and he handles it with such an authenticity that feels like the Hiccup that we knew from the first film, but at the same time we recognize that he is more world weary and he has more experience being a leader, especially after the events of the second film. So it just feels authentic, it feels real, and it's something so rare because often when you have a sequel in a franchise, the characters have gone through their character development in the first film, and then somehow in the second film it's kind of like they've gone back to square one, whereas in this franchise it's the constant flow of development has been sustained, and you see this come to a crux in the third act basically of the franchise. Here Hiccup faces questions surrounding his leadership and his credibility as a leader without perhaps having the dragons around, and especially having Toothless, who acts as their alpha. It's really interesting to see Toothless and Hiccup out of their natural element. I think this film does a really great job of towing the line between humor and gravitas as it explores the implications of having a friend for so long and then that friend going through some drastic life changes. And I think when this film focuses on those challenges that both characters have to deal with, that's when it's at its peak. The supporting characters are also pretty great. They're pretty much a well-oiled machine at this point, so they're very much staying in line with their characters from the previous films. I think there's slightly less character development there just because they're more background characters. They have their funny moments, they have their shticks, and they've kind of just stuck to that but done it very, very well. The character of Astrid, I would say, is an exception to that because she's always been closer to Hiccup, and she provides some really touching scenes, and she definitely gets through to the character of Hiccup in a way that none of the other human characters are able to. And that leaves me with the animation of the film itself. So I am a huge fan of animated films, and I'm always looking out for really spectacular and different animation styles, especially after seeing Spider-Verse last year. And I have to say that the animation in this film is definitely polished. It's definitely in line with the aesthetic of the general franchise. The use of coloring and textures has definitely been enhanced over the years. It's the kind of franchise where you don't really spot it when you see the newest films. When you go back and you watch the original film, you realize that actually, yeah, the CG has definitely been improved over the years due to the newer technology, and it's really done the film justice. Especially here, you have certain characters who have facial expressions and general quirks that are very much highlighted in a way that in previous forms of animation they wouldn't be, just because that level of detail perhaps wasn't possible, it was far too difficult and time consuming. Whatever the reason, I definitely think it's just more polished. And in terms of DreamWorks as well, because I know that they're under Universal now, it definitely has the same sort of feel, although there are a few quirks in the film that reminded me a bit of Illumination's kind of shtick, which is with the annoying little characters that kind of show up all the time. I don't hate the Minions franchise as much as other people do. I think they've serviced a particular type of audience very, very well, which is the younger audiences. And I think that's important because films should be made for different types of audiences. And I think they've done that very, very well because it's become very profitable. But I don't want to see Minions light in my How to Train Your Dragon films, to be honest. And that brings me to some of the less positive things I have to say about this film. I would say that there's nothing that's aggressively terrible, but firstly, the villain. So we have this villain he's a dragon hunter, and he's out to basically attack the dragons and attack Burke's way of life, which they've developed over the course of these films. First off, I really like that fact as well, going back to the development point where Burke has just become so comfortable with their dragons and they have a place in their society. In fact, their whole society has changed surrounding the existence of their dragons in their village. I think that's really, really cool. And this villain has come along to threaten that way of life. I think the villain is a bit subpar. His motivations are vague. The villain was very much a character who kind of served as a plot device to get certain characters from here to here and so on. So I think he was kind of incidental to the main story, and he wasn't very strong as a villain. I would say the same thing, to be honest, about all of the villains. Especially in the second one as well, I can barely remember who the antagonist was then. So I personally don't think that in this franchise the villains have ever been the huge selling point. Secondly, I would say that the story itself is also not spectacular. Once again, someone is threatening the dragons and the Burke way of life, and so they have to find a way to get from A to B to C to D in order to save the dragons. It's very similar, I think, to the second film in that regard. The second film had a few more twists and turns, but I think the story doesn't really stand out to me as something particularly unique. Overall, it kind of serves the purpose of wrapping up the trilogy with a nice, neat bow and giving these characters a nice conclusion that they very much deserve. But as a story on its own, if you're not particularly invested in the How to Train Your Dragon series already, I don't think this is going to make you exceptionally invested now. And also, going off of the title The Hidden World, it doesn't actually play a huge factor into the story itself. There is a scene where we get to see the hidden world, and it is absolutely beautiful. You can tell that the animators had a fun time just creating this dragon world with all these different colors and textures. It was incredible. But then it doesn't really, again, play a huge factor. It's mostly just the symbolic nature of the world and what it means for the dragons and for the people of Burke. That kind of plays a bigger factor than the actual physical world itself. I'm trying not to give anything away. you can probably guess what's gonna happen, but I'm trying to be good here. And lastly, I wasn't a huge fan of Toothless's new friend in the film, and if you've seen any of the promotional material, you know how this is gonna go already, but without giving anything away, I just think she wasn't established as a character in her own right, so she's not incredibly likable. She doesn't have the same amount of personality and charisma that Toothless has, and to be honest, none of the other dragons do really. They're just given vague dog-like characteristics, but they don't have, it's different. It's kind of like a lightning in a bottle type situation. Because she's such a huge plot point, it was kind of disappointing to see the way that the character was depicted. So overall, I would say that How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World is a nice way to close off the trilogy. This has been one of the most consistent animated franchises yet. Although for me personally, I think the first film will always be the one that I go to the most often, just because I think it is the best one and it does have the best kind of spark in it. I do think that the second and third film serve well to kind of explore the mythology further and broaden the world, and I think they did a fantastic job with this final installment. I believe it's the final installment. They might do another film. I would be open to that, but I think it finishes off really nicely. I think DreamWorks should just leave this alone and go work on another franchise, perhaps the Megamind or Rise of the Guardians sequel that I'm still waiting for. That would be great. So that's it for today's chat. I've told you guys what my thoughts are on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. Now it's time for you guys to tell me what your thoughts are down in the comments below. If you had a fun time watching, then please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so that you can be notified when I post next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.